So now that we've gone through our reconnaissance, our scanning and enumeration, we're ready to try to throw an attack and gain access. Based on our scanning and enumeration, we've identified a vulnerability to attack. In our case, it's going to be our Windows machine with Microsoft 08-067 vulnerability. So let's launch our Kali machine. We still have all the machines up and running from our previous lab. So from our Kali prompt, we're going to start the Metasploit framework, which is MSF console. Now from the Metasploit framework, we're going to be able to configure our exploit and our payload that we want to send over. So as you can see here, there's over 1,500 exploits, over 400 payloads, so we need to figure out which one we want to use. Now based on our reconnaissance and our scanning and enumeration, we're going to use the Microsoft 08-067 vulnerability. Now this vulnerability goes against Windows XP and Windows 2000 servers, and these will actually go against the file sharing capability, and we know that they were running file sharing on port 445. So when I search for that, you'll find it right here. It's in the exploit Windows SMB directory, and it is the Microsoft 08-067 Netapi. I'm going to copy that so I don't have to type it out each time, and I'm just going to type in use and then paste it in and hit enter. The second thing I need to do is set my payload. Now the payload is, once we've broken down the door with the exploit, what code do we want them to run? In our case, we want them to run the Windows shell reverse TCP. Now that payload is set. So now we have a couple more options. We're going to do show options, and you'll see here that we need a remote host, which is the target we're going after, and a listening host is the listening we're going to do, which in our case is going to be the Kali machine. So we're going to do set our host to the IP of the Windows machine, which was 192.168.56.100. And then we need to set our listening host to our IP for our Kali machine, which was 192.168.56.102. And now we can show our options to verify those options took, and you can see they did. There is our Windows machine IP, and there is our listening host for our Kali machine. Now, the reason why we're allowed to set this listening host is because in an exploit, I may be the one who is setting the exploits, but I don't want to do all the post-exploitation, and I'll allow my friend to do that. So for instance, if there was two of us in this room, I might be 102, he might be 103, I'll throw the exploit, the answer that comes back will be to his machine, so he can then do all the information gathering, and that way I might be the guy who breaks down the door, and I have a team of guys who take the information out. The other thing you want to note here is this listening port, which is currently set to 4444. That's the default for Metasploit. It doesn't have to be 444 though. You can set it to 80 or 443 or any other port you need to help you get through and back through a firewall. Now that we've set up all of our configurations, all we have to do to run this exploit is type the word exploit. And you can see that we started the reverse handler on our Kali machine, which is our Kali machine listening on port 4444. It then goes out and sends the exploit on port 445, which was the vulnerability we were trying to trigger, to the Windows machine. It detected that that was a Service Pack 3 Windows XP machine, and based on that, it threw the appropriate vulnerability and the appropriate exploit for that vulnerability. It then sent an encoded stage dropper over to that machine, and that encoded stage was then received, broke in, used the command shell, and sent it back to me. And so now I can see that it went from my Kali machine to the Windows machine, and that is the connection that we have open right now. And notice where we are. We're in the System32 directory in Windows. We have now been dropped into the command prompt of Windows, and we are there as a system level user. So we have the ability to create files, edit files, delete files, or run any other commands that we would using the command prompt as if we were there locally on the machine. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start gathering some information. So why don't we start with something like system information. And what we can see here is a bunch of information about this machine. We can see the exact version it is, we can see what kind of machine it is it part of a domain or just a workstation? This is important to know because if I broke into a machine that was part of a domain, I would then try to go from getting system on this particular machine to being a domain admin and continue to elevate my privileges. I can see information such as the product ID, the date and time it was installed, how long it's been up, how many processors it has, how much memory it has, how much hard disk it has, all sorts of information that could be useful to me. The other thing I can see here is everything that it's been patched for. In this case, the only patch it has is this one particular one, Q1472222, which means that it's Service Pack 3. None of the other updates have been had. So this means that there's a lot of vulnerabilities on this box that I can then go and attack, which is good for us as a training opportunity. But if I was the one who owned this box, I would know, hey, there's a lot of things I got to do to get this up to shape. So what are some other things we can do? Well, let's go ahead and look around this drive. Let's go to the C drive. We'll go to the main root directory of the C drive, and we'll see what's there. Right now, it just looks like a basic Windows machine. We can even go into their documents and settings and see if there's anything there. In this case, we see there's a user, John Sim. And you can see that we're able to access John's information because, again, we're a system level user. Now, he doesn't happen to have anything on there. Why? Because when we set this box up, we didn't put anything there for us to find. We just set up a basic default blank account. But we can now start writing things to John. For instance, we might do something like this. Echo, hi John, I hacked your machine. And then we're going to pipe that over to a file called hacked.txt and hit enter. So now that file should be sitting there on the desktop, which we can see it is. Now if that file was there before, we would be able to see it by typing that file to the screen. So in our case, we would type hacked.txt, and we could see what the contents of that file are. Now if we're John on our machine, what do we think we're going to see? Well, on his desktop now, we have a hacked file. And we can see that, and that is just proof that we were able to break into his machine. Now, if he had a bunch of information on here, we'd be able to steal that information as well, but in this case of this machine, there wasn't much there. So once we're done with that machine, we would just type exit to get out of the command prompt, and that will actually break the connection between us and that machine as well. And then hit Control-C. Abort the session, yes. And that's the basics of how to hack into a Windows box using the MS-08067 vulnerability.